intelligence data.
I've got that lightning inside me, son of a god. I'm like a titan that's rising, oh, just you watch. I'm stepping in the fade, there is no time to waste. I've got that lightning inside me, this is how legends are made. Are made. I'm cranking up on the throttle, victory is mine. Show you the harder the battle, harder I fight. I've come too far to quit. Step back, I'm going in. I'm cranking up on the throttle. This is how legends are made.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Ships of the Line. We're here again finally for the first stream of 2022 for some history after a little bit of a hiatus because at the end of last year I had to go to the US for the first time in 2 years and we just had no time to schedule a new one. So we're here to cover German destroyers, and we're going to go through World War I and the early destroyers into World War II and the problematic World War II destroyers. In the words of a, quote, German senior official who is unnamed, the Germans were he said, "We were very good at making freshwater destroyers," which is not exactly a compliment considering you want to have ocean-going destroyers. So, but I'm not here alone. I'm joined today by the Sailing Robin.
Good morning, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this stream again. I'm glad to be here. It's been a while. Most of you will cringe, and I know exactly why, because half of my head is gone. But that's what it is. I'm happy to be supporting Blip again today with this stream. We have something special as well today. We have a small giveaway that allows you to earn one G101, one T61, one Z35, and one Z39. I will be posting the link of such giveaway in the chat right here. We'll announce basically every time Blips cover one of the ships available in the giveaway, we'll just give the one away like directly after. So,
yep. So
tune in on the link and send, like, just answer every single question correct, because if your username is wrong, we won't be able to find you and invoice you the ship. So there it is. And I'll give it straight back to Mr. Blip.
Alrighty. So German destroyers go way back to the beginning of basically torpedo boat development, and where you have the kind of their first foray into things. They call it V1. They have several different V1 ships, and I'll show you a picture here of the blueprint for one of these early torpedo boats, and it looks very different from what you would see from a destroyer later in history. These we have a few blueprints tonight, courtesy of the Dreadnought Project website. That's run by several like naval or amateur naval historians who provide primary sources for easy access, especially for World War I and some World War II German ships, as well as a bunch of early World War I French warships. So this is V1. So if I remember right, on the date on this blueprint is like 1886. Which is way back, well before the time of well, the Warships legends. So we get so the torpedo boats were small. So this is probably only several hundred tons, and they weren't really like they were really very small at the beginning with small torpedoes that didn't pack a whole lot of punch. But people knew that there was potential in torpedo armament, especially, well, at the time, self-propelled torpedo armament. And so they invested more and more in this. And the great thing about torpedo boats is that they're relatively cheap, so you can build a whole lot of them. And so going on into World War I, they had a bunch of destroyers and torpedo boats and different things. One thing to know about German small ships is that they don't have a consistent way of naming things. And like, there's the most un-German thing in terms of nothing is organized and nothing is consistent and nothing makes sense. So I'm going to be using torpedo boat and destroyer interchangeably throughout, or DD. You know, there are torpedo boot and, or actually it's torpedo boat, and Zerstörer, which is the German words for them, but it means the same thing in English, so I'm going to use the English words. And so going into World War I, you see the development of the V-25 class. So this comes, oh, that's the V-170. I don't have a V-25 model, but we have a V-25 in game, so we're going to use this one. And these are in the roughly 800-ton range for ships. So these are some of, V-25 is one of the smallest ships in World of Warships Legends. Not the smallest, that would be USS Smith, but the V-25 is the smallest German ship in the game, if I remember right, and it's basically second smallest overall. You know, you have a very small armament. You have 3 guns, 6 torpedoes. German destroyers at this time very much preferred torpedo armament over guns. As originally built, V-25 had 3 88mm guns, not 105mm guns. But during the World War I, they rearmed them with 105mm guns to get that a little bit of extra punch. These ships were like served through many parts of the war, and a lot of these ships ended up surviving far in excess of when they should have. Not necessarily the V-25s, but these early German destroyers, some of them lasted well into even the 50s. And granted, they weren't active service in the 50s, but they were still around, for better or for worse. The latest one that I'm aware of that survives was up until 1953, which was in the Turkish Navy, which was the destroyer that sank a British pre-dreadnought during World War I. So they kept it around forever as a hulk until 53. These, they have a very interesting bow shape, which if you can zoom in on a little bit there, Robin, you see it's kind of, they called it like an enclosed or coffin bow. It, in theory, allows them to go much faster, and especially and keep water away from the ship, but it ended up kind of diving in, and these were very wet ships all the time. And so it wasn't pleasant to be on, but they weren't designed to operate for long periods of time.
Just a question, are these ships considered torpedo boats still, or are we already within what a destroyer could be called?
So World War I, there isn't a very set definition of things, but this I would consider to be well in the torpedo boat range. It's a very large torpedo boat, but that for the time, but it's more torpedo than it is destroyer. Like Royal Navy destroyers at this time are going to be 300 tons or 400 tons larger. The question here is the standard gun caliber for a German destroyer in World War I is 105 millimeters. Some of them had 88 millimeter guns, but 105 millimeters was standard. And they preferred, but the guns were not the main thing. They preferred torpedoes. They were meant to be used in like a fleet action, so they would charge the enemy battleship line, dump all their torpedoes and run away, was the idea. They got used during the Battle of Jutland, but didn't see a ton of success. Maybe a couple torpedo hits here and there, but nothing entirely notable. But all of them vary wildly. So during World War One, the destroyer concept was not set in stone, and most nations did not develop like a standardized destroyer design. They would list specifications and give basically an outline of what they expected from their destroyer, and then give that to a dockyard, and the dockyard would be responsible for building it and finalizing all the details in the design. And sometimes even within the same dockyard, you would get different sizes and shapes for a destroyer class. So no V-25 destroyer is like another in that sense. So let's see. So the V-25s are the largest group of destroyers during World War I. It's grouped as a class, but they're not only Vs. During World War I, Germany would name their destroyer or give their destroyer a letter based off, well, before World War I, really. They would give their destroyers a letter based off of what dockyard created the destroyer. So V was AG Vulcan, S was Schischau, and G was Germania Werft. And you would have, G101 was a Germania Werft ship that was built, and then basically it's a serial number 101. And so V would be Vulcan made, V and number 25 on paper. Sometimes the numbers would be changed here and there, which is very annoying. The V-25 class had 71 ships, 32 of which survived the war, but the 29 of them were scuttled during the high seas fleet scuttling itself in Scapa Flow in 1919. So they all pretty much went under. All the surviving V-25s went under at the end during that event. But they varied in size and shape a little bit, but all of them carried 3 guns with 6 torpedoes. At the time, it was 500 millimeter torpedoes, but later they went to a 533 millimeter torpedo during the 20s, well, even the late 20s and early 30s, but this was not applied to the V-25 historically. They're small, they're short-ranged, and they're pretty much the definition of a large torpedo boat. Uniquely for German warships, the V-25 class were all oil-fired ships rather than coal, which is most German warships of this time were coal-fired. These were fired with oil, and oil gives you a massive advantage in speed due to not having to or you can automate the fueling process for the boilers. So you don't have to have men sitting there shoveling coal into the boilers for as long as you are running, and which gives these ships a tactical advantage in that sense, provided that you have a supply of oil, which is not exactly something Germany's known for during both World Wars, but that was the idea. And it is actually an advantage. It's a huge advantage that the Queen Elizabeth class battleships have on the British Navy, and they're the first battleships to be completely oil-fired. Like the different shipyards were given a lot of influence over their designs, a lot of detail, like for detailed stuff. So they would determine the internal arrangement of things and how big and how small the ships were. So that's why they can vary quite a bit. Let's see.
I see a lot of questions regarding the giveaway. We will announce the winners in the chat as soon as we reach the specified ship. So
yeah. So the first ship is T-61, if I remember right?
I mean, we're gonna have G101, we're gonna have T-61, Z-35, and we're gonna have Z-39 as well.
Actually, we're gonna be on G101 soon-ish. So, yes. So almost all of the German destroyers in World War I, or torpedo boats, are smaller than the Royal Navies. They're basically probably about 300 tons, 200 to 300 tons smaller than the Royal Navy equivalent, destroyers, and that's to basically just due to design considerations. The Royal Navy had to have longer range for all of their ships, which requires a larger warship. The V-shaped torpedo tubes, I've saw a few questions about them. This was basically just a World War I German Navy thing. I'm not entirely sure why they chose to do that, but they did. And so I guess it makes it easier to fire from a fire forward. So if you're charging forward, one of the common things for destroyers to do at this time was to be in line abreast. So you would have your enemy line up here, and your destroyers would be in columns and going towards it, very much Battle of Trafalgar style. And so if you're going forward, having a V-shape destroyer torpedo tubes and the ability to fire forwards very dramatically can be an advantage. So that may have been why, but that's my guess. Let's see. So already covered the letter-based naming. During World War I, they ended up changing the names of a lot of destroyers to T with a number. So like V-25 became T-120 something, if I remember right. That happened to the older destroyers first and went on as newer destroyers came in. So the V-25s didn't get the T names until like 1917, whereas even earlier ships got it in like 1914. So it seems to be that once a ship reached a certain age or certain capability level, they changed the name to T. But I don't know what the exact reasoning is. So I'm not aware of World War I destroyers having anti-submarine weapons other than torpedoes. That wasn't really the purpose for World War I destroyers yet. World War I destroyers absolutely did do anti-submarine work, but they weren't designed for it. That was something that they kind of adopted during the war. So they would work pretty closely with light cruisers with that question. Less so with armored cruisers, but more so with light cruisers.
Mickey, I am 26. Lane is 25. So not sure what your definition of very young is, good sir. Anyway, I digress.
And I got in quite young, but I had a very specific set of skills that they were looking for, so I got lucky. A very specific set of skills.
Exactly.
So from 1914 onwards, they standardized towards the T naming system for old and new ships, mostly the older ones. And the numbers assigned to a destroyer do not reflect capabilities. So it is possible that a higher number destroyer has lower capabilities than a lower number destroyer during this time. So the numbers are just for reference only, not for any sort of indication of anything. I'm not aware of any destroyers with triple main turrets. Triple turrets are quite complicated and heavy. It's possible that some got one experimentally, but I'm not aware of any. Certainly not any German ones.
Anti-air mounts maybe, but main turrets.
Yeah, you could get a triple and quadruple anti-air gun mounts, but not main guns. So let's see. Some destroyers, during this time, both Germany and Britain and France even were making ships for other nations that didn't have the ability to build ships super easily. So Germany was building a series of destroyers for Argentina. And so there were I think it was about 6 of them. And this is what G101 is. So G101 was built for Argentina as a true destroyer, but the war broke out, so Germany just took over the ship. It was made in Germania Werft, so it was assigned the G letter name. And that's basically its story. It serves through World War I. If I remember right, it even survives and participates in the Battle of Jutland. And
The
then
G101
is scrapped afterwards.
Interesting to see the shell storage at the back of
Yeah.
the rear mast here, at the rear superstructure.
Yeah, you have the ready-use ammunition, because these ships aren't going to be slugging it out for long enough to really go through a ton of ammo, ideally. But if they do end up going through that ammo, they have to basically daisy chain it, do like a bucket chain and pass the ammo from inside to outside. So that's G101. And like I said, some of these ships make it really, really far into the 20th century. So, but most of them end up like the V-25s and later classes in that group end up being used as targets or just scrapped in the 20s and the 30s. The Royal Navy had one kicking around until like 1939, but it was just basically a target. So let's see. The V-170 type was not built, but it was started. And we have the blueprint for that one here. And the V-170 is a larger torpedo boat. And this is going to be, again, 3 150 millimeter guns and 6 torpedo tubes. These destroyers are the largest, really, that were considered for building during World War I, but were not completed.
The blueprint shows torpedo boat as a name. That was the designation still are torpedo boats. That's how the Germans called them, even though designated they were more destroyer types than torpedo boats.
Yeah, so even at this time, the crews would sometimes refer to them as destroyers. The official designation was torpedo boat, and it is boat, not boot.
Boat, okay.
So it's a very common American misconception because of Das Boot, the movie. It is actually pronounced boat and not boot. So fun fact today I learned, I learned that quite a while ago, but I hope some of you have learned something at least from that. The V-170s were not completed, but I have the blueprints here, and they were worked on courtesy again of the Dreadnought project. Please go give them a visit and take a look at what they have, because they have a lot of really interesting stuff, including blueprints of more famous ships like the Prince Eugen, which is pretty interesting to look at. So but Germany loses World War I, and it was pretty decisive. During the Treaty of Versailles, they end up having to really downsize their navy and are left with some old torpedo boats and a couple of pre-dreadnoughts and a couple of old cruisers. The torpedo boats that they end up getting to keep, though, are quite old. And due to the Treaty of Versailles, the stipulations in the treaty, they were able to replace these destroyers in the 1920s. And they create 2 classes of destroyers. Well, they're really more torpedo boats, but by this time, they're quite small. And these are the Type 23 and Type 24 class, also known as the Möwe class, and the Wolf class, or the Raubtier class, which Raubtier is carnivore. These are based on the large World War I torpedo boats. Again, it's 3 105 millimeter guns and 6 torpedo tubes. They survive until World War II and get used throughout the conflict for various purposes. But they're mostly like second line, so like mine laying, escort duty. But they do participate, notably, in the Channel Dash. I'm going to bring up, we don't have either of these types of ships in game, but again, I have the blueprint for you. This is for the Wolf, which is the Type 24 class, which is just a slightly improved version of the Type 23. And these ships see service throughout World War II, and even beyond in a couple navies. I believe in the French Navy and possibly even the Russian Navy, one of them survived. But they're based on the larger German torpedo boats. And they're really not a destroyer by 1920s standards even. Smaller than a Clemson, smaller than an A-class, and they're around 1,000 tons. So they're not really capable of World War II destroyer battles, even though they get pulled into a few of them. So let's see. And so, and basically due to the Treaty of Versailles situation, Germany is not really allowed to build a large navy or build large ships, including a lot of destroyer designs. So they're very limited in terms of their design experience and development through this period. Basically, the problem is that they don't have enough ships being built at this time to keep naval engineers, like military naval engineers, employed reasonably. And so they lose a lot of that industrial experience that they had gained during World War I just to basically attrition and people moving on, going to work in merchant jobs, like merchant designing jobs for engineering purposes, or even going into things like civil engineering. This happens more in the surface portion of the German Navy than in the submarine arm. A lot of the submarine engineers end up going to places like Denmark and working there. Some of them even go to as far as Japan and build a lot of the early Japanese submarines, and especially diesel engines. A lot of Japanese diesel engines are based on German designs from when the German engineers were there. But in the surface Navy, they lose a lot of engineering experience, and that really hurts them going into destroyer designs in World War II. But before we go into the World War II destroyers, we're probably going to cut into or get the G101 giveaway done, which we'll let Robin here finish.
I'll do as soon as the game is done. Yeah, I'll take care of it, and I'll remind you guys about it. Don't worry.
Yeah. And Robin is busy seal clubbing quite a lot. In the G101,
Stay in the gap.
got 84,000 damage.
All right, we're good. I'm just gonna go CV hunting, but I guess I can't. Yeah, just don't mind me. I'll make the giveaway and announce the winner in about 5 minutes. Don't let me interrupt, Lane.
Yeah, no worries. So, let's see. And so we're going on. We lose a lot of this naval engineering experience through the late 20s and the early 30s. During this time, you basically only see the building of the Type 23s, the Type 24s, the cruiser Emden, another cruiser Emden, probably not the famous one that you probably have heard of, but a different one. They also eventually start building the pocket battleships in the late 20s, early 30s, and going into after the changes in government that happened in the early 1930s, in which basically the Nazis come into power. They want to start building new destroyers, and so they set up a design competition. During this time, they also get a agreement with Britain that allows them to ignore the Treaty of Versailles essentially and build up to a certain limit, which I believe was like 1/3 the size of the Royal Navy. Can't remember exactly, but relatively, like, it's large, much larger than what they were previously allowed, but it's not humongous and not contestable with the Royal Navy. And so, but they're also bound by the limitations of the other naval treaties that they're not signatories of, but due to this additional agreement with Britain, they have to follow them. The ships that they design first are a pair of true destroyers, or not a pair, but a series of true destroyers. This is the um, thread the needle much. Thread the needle in reverse against the border.
Oh, I'm sorry. The Langley-sized gap. Just classic Legends things, aren't they? Ay. Sorry, Lane.
No, you're fine. I'm just flabbergasted at this point.
Oh my, like this Langley's border humping and getting away with it. The TV's gonna get it. Anyway, it's fine, GG.
Oh man.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. And so the if you want to run that giveaway here,
Yeah, let's do it
do
now.
that. And
All
then-
right. So for 1G101, let's check it out.
So we're finally getting into the proper destroyers, and so they issue a competition to a lot of different design bureaus for what would become the Type 1934 or Z1 class destroyers. We have in game a ship called Gaida. Chris taught us how to pronounce it at one point. I've forgotten since. That is based off of the AG Vulcan design, SK-22, which was submitted to the 1934 design trials but was not accepted. Gaida is was not built, but it's built it's based on the specifications given at the start of the competition, which at the start was 4 127 millimeter guns, or 128 in terms of actual bore size, and 8 torpedoes with a high speed. So the Gaida has 4 of them, and then, if I remember right, but they later changed the specifications to where they need 5. And so we see already that Germany wants to have a very heavily armed, large destroyer as their major.
So I have a bit of an
Destroyer.
issue here.
Oh, no.
The PC I have doesn't have Excel, which means that I have the email of the winner, but I don't have its name. So I can't really announce it, to be honest, because they would be announcing a public email to an entire chat. So let me just figure out how I want to do it. See if I can fix this.
Can you open it in Google Sheets?
It's a good idea, actually. Let me try. Go for it, man. Don't let me.
And so we already see that Germany wants to have very large destroyers. And so we're jumping from the Type 24 class, which is around about 1,000 tons, maybe 1,100 by this point in time. And we're jumping up to double that. We're going to a design that is 2,200 tons, which is larger than contemporary Royal Navy designs, which are averaging around 1,400 to 1,500. And it's even larger than the Japanese designs of the early 1930s, which are like the Hatsuharu and the Shiratsuyu, which are in the 17 to 1800 range. So they're jumping to very large destroyers very quickly. They call for 528 millimeter guns and 8 torpedo tubes, which is a very heavy armament for this time period. And they call for a speed of 36 knots. In order to do this, they unfortunately make the decision to go with a very high pressure boiler system. And they have a couple of different designs of high pressure boilers. Both of them are terrible.
Which ship are we on it right now, so I can showcase the right one?
This is Moss.
Mass. Oh, wow.
Yep.
Okay, I'm late. Apologies,
No,
guys.
you're fine. Guido didn't exist, so we can pass it.
All right.
So we're already to Moss. And from this point onward, in general, German destroyers can be described and this is from comes from a section out of a book by Koop and Schmolke, which is German destroyers in World War II, and basically comes from the German evaluation of their own ships. From this point onward, German destroyers are considered overloaded and top-heavy. They have poor seakeeping and stability. They have bad bows. They have poor stern design. They're excessively large, and they're uneconomical.
Okay, so what's good about them?
On paper, they're very heavily armed and have good torpedoes by early World War II standards. But you have to be able to deliver them, and that's their problem. So another problem with the Z1 class and successors, but less so as time goes on, is that they're very, very, very unreliable.
Right.
So unreliable that they have a readiness rating of 40%, which 40% readiness rating is about on the same level as the Chieftain main battle tank, which is not known for its reliability, and means that these ships cannot be available when the German Navy needs them to be. And so this first design, the 1934, gets redesigned a little bit after the first trials, and they create the 1934A type. And basically, the main difference between this and the early ones were they had a different bow, an improved bow design, and a redesigned stern. And these ships were basically, the German Navy did not like these ships, but they had to use them. As soon as they come into service and pass through trials, they're already talking about moving them into reserve as training ships. So your first destroyers that you've built, and you're getting ready for a war in the next 10 years, and your first destroyer design is a failure. It's not looking good. But they end up having to use them. So they basically keep on modifying them and improving them. They give them different bows and different sterns. They try different things. They try wood as like different parts of the underwater design to make different shapes and to see if they can get better maneuverability out of them. And so all these ships get like random modifications to them throughout their service lives. The Type 1934A uses the same boiler system that's terrible. It's the Wagner boilers. They're a high pressure boiler system, which really doesn't get perfected by anybody except for the US Navy for destroyers. The Royal Navy gets into them kind of late on for different reasons, economy reasons mainly. And the Japanese don't get into them until their very last destroyer designs. And so the Germans are kind of going deep. You're going into the deep end immediately with their first destroyer design, and they pay for it. The new stern design that they build for the Type 1934As is what's called a stow keel, which I believe translates to basically a wedge keel. And I have a photo of that. This is a 1934. This is, I think, Z3. And this is one of the 1934As. There's basically not very much visual difference between the two of them. And another one of them. And another one. I have a lot of pictures for us here tonight. That is Z2. Okay, so this is the stow keel. As you can see, it's the rear end of the ship is a wedge shape, or like a V shape. It comes out to a point, and then underneath the ship, behind the rudder, it also tapers downward, which in theory that adds buoyancy to the very rear of the ship, which means that the ship will, which should arrive or ride better at high speeds. However, you need to have a good bow for this to work properly, or else you're adding buoyancy to the rear end of the ship while your bow goes downward. Because it's a lever, the whole ship is going like this. So if you increase the upper end of the ship, the bow needs to be more buoyant. And so these ships, the Stow keel was a failure. And they ended up having them removed during World War II and replaced with basically a better design. The problem with the bow is essentially that they didn't have enough shear, which is point and like curvature, which allows to shed water, and is just also more volume. Later on, these ships are modified with a type of early version of the Atlantic bow, which gives them a little bit more seakeeping, but these ships are never good seakeeping ships. So, question, metal bar on the back of the hull. So let's see if we can go back to that picture. So do you mean that metal bar that is on the side of the ship there? If that's what you mean, that is literally just a guide. So basically what that does is it's a guard. So when you're going up against a dockyard and like pointing against it, that guard protects your propeller from hitting the inside. So it's just essentially the same width as the propeller, because the propeller is wider than will overhang from the hull, and so that overhangs from the hull to prevent it from smacking into anything, in theory.
Benny Hill theme, please, guys.
Ring around the rosy. I think that's it. Saturation though. So, in terms of future ships of the line streams, we'll have a vote at the end of the stream for what comes next, and you'll get to see what the options are for the next one. So I won't spoil that yet. So these ships are they're serviceable. They're not great. They're not. I would call them terrible. They're probably better than terrible, but they're not going to be a shining example of what a destroyer is, and even a shining example of what a German destroyer is. And essentially they even changed their propellers through this time period. So originally these ships have a brass propeller, which is what the traditional material is for a propeller during World War II. They find that brass is a very expensive and rare resource during World War II, especially for Germany. You need to have a combination of materials, bronze and tin, to make brass, but it makes a very good propeller material because it's not corrosive, or it can't be corroded easily, and it is also easily cast, so you can make complicated shapes with them, which you need for propellers. They spend a lot of money investing into making stainless steel propellers, and then they have to go to regular steel propellers. This allows them to use less critical resources, steel and nickel, rather than brass, but it costs a lot of money, and it also increases how much development time you need, or crafting time, building time you need for each propeller. So by as much as 6 times the amount of time it takes to make a steel propeller rather than a brass propeller. We don't have any notes, unfortunately, of whether or not the steel was better than brass or worse than brass. But we do know that with modern experience and like submarine propeller design, that steel is rougher than brass is and will lead to more cavitation, which means that at least in submarines, steel propellers are not good. So but we don't have any notes from the German destroyers to say either way or another. So it may be that they were just more expensive, and that was the trade-off for having an available resource. So let's see. And so all of the Z1 class, so the 1934 class and the follow-up 1934A and the follow-on 1936 class, which we'll get to, all of them had anti-roll tanks. Basically, they had ballast tanks on the side of the hull, which were to compensate for the ship rolling and moving at sea, hopefully increasing stability. These were deemed a failure and were removed on almost all the ships except for Z20, if I remember right, and for experimental purposes. And so they replaced these anti-roll tanks with just regular keels on the ship, which whenever you see a ship sink and they have those diagonal keels, that's what they replaced them with, basically, is that slows down rolling and makes it more controllable and more stable. What these ships indicate is that Germany goes into a lot of complicated, high science, techie stuff into these put them into these destroyers, and then a lot of it just doesn't work. It turns out German science might not be the best in the world, but they're putting a lot of effort in and a lot of money. And so the argument is they went with something more simple. Would they have more of them for the war? And more of them would have been very helpful, but we don't know, and we will never know. So we can postulate, but we'll never know. Then these ships were bad enough to be considered for the reserve as soon as they go into service, but they'd never end up going into reserve and even get used after the war. Because basically World War II starts well before the Kriegsmarine planned it to. Kriegsmarine were hoping for a late 40s war, which is what they were promised. Turns out 1938 and 39 is when it actually happens, and so that's the way it is. So the first losses of these are the ships that Germany goes into World War II with, and the first losses of them, well, the first loss of one of these destroyers is to friendly fire, which is, not a great omen. And essentially what happens is that a group of destroyers leaves port for a mine laying run. They're going to go lay mines in the British Channel. And the Luftwaffe also sends out a flight to go bomb trawling fishing ships in the English Channel. The Luftwaffe was supposed to communicate everything that they were doing in terms of naval engagements. They did. But the German admiral that was in charge of being a liaison did not pass the message forward. And so, classic miscommunication error. So the Luftwaffe airplane finds a series of ships. They claim that one of the ships opened fire on them with their AA guns, and so they bombed them. And they end up sinking one of the Moss class there, and then another one of the ships also runs into a mine and explodes. And so this operation does not go well for them. They start the war off, don't really achieve anything, and then they lose 2 ships to friendly fire. And this is known as Operation Vikinger, or Operation Viking, and was one of the more famous friendly fire incidents of World War II. Then later on, these ships see battle with during the Norwegian campaign. And so during the winter of 1940, so the beginning of 1940, Germany invades Norway. They sent a massive, for German standards, fleet to go take over Norwegian ports, including Narvik, Trondheim, Oslo, and a few others. Maybe not Oslo. I think Oslo though. And on the way, 2 German destroyers and the cruiser Admiral Hipper run into a lone Royal Navy destroyer, the HMS Glowworm. The Glowworm versus Hipper engagement is pretty famous for Glowworm basically for ramming the Hipper quite courageously, and there being a very good interaction between German and Royal Navy sailors at this time. But there was also 2 destroyers there. They're not remembered because they really didn't do much. And so Glowworm appears or was detected. And Z5, which is 1934A class. So a ship like this turns to engage.
You can leave the picture on.
Yeah, turns to engage the Glowworm. In this, the seas are pretty rough in the North Sea around Norway, and were pretty rough at this time. And so Z5 turns to engage the Glowworm, and then he immediately heels over 55 degrees, which is a lot. 55 degrees is an excessive heel. And takes water over the ship into the boilers and basically disables itself. Because you have to have ventilation shafts outside the hull so that the boilers get air in, and as well as the crew gets air in, and water just pours in and then puts out the boilers, and then Z5 is done. So Glowworm gets a maneuver kill for that, and knocks itself out. Z11 is also there, and powers up to 35 knots in this rough sea with its quite bad bow, and plunges into a wave at 35 knots, and basically heavily damages its bow and breaks glass on the bridge and floods in. I'm sure recently there's been a couple of videos of of ships in river boats in heavy seas, and the water comes through the front windows. It's basically what happens to Z11. So she fires a few times and then smokes up and disengages. Because and so Glowworm goes into battle against 2 destroyers and a heavy cruiser and comes out with 2 destroyers damaged, or 2 destroyers and a heavy cruiser damaged for the loss of Glowworm.
That's a fair trade, I would assume.
I would call that a fair trade. I see this as an absolute win. And that's not the only story of interest of these destroyers during the Norwegian campaign.
Chat, I'm sorry.
What?
I had the loading bar on you, as you can see here.
Oh.
The entire time. And I'm sorry because I put somebody in timeout because of it. My bad. Sorry, dude. You should be back in a few minutes.
Whoop.
But yes, there was a loading bar on Blip for a while. It's okay.
Yeah.
He's just loading his knowledge.
Yeah, and so for a side note, the numbers on the side of a destroyer do not always line on to which Z it is. So this is not Z22. So it's so when you see these pictures and you see 12 on it, it's probably not Z12. Might be, but probably not. But Z13 also has a very eventful trek across the sea into Norway. And in one of the books that I read for this stream, Coop and Schmolka, again, the details the engineer's story of it. So before the operation, Z13 takes on extra boiling water because it was having problems getting enough clean boiling water for the boilers, and so he has to take on extra, which needs more weight in the ship. He puts it in buckets in the forward part of the ship just to have it, and they basically only barely make it to Norway. Another problem with these ships is that they have major problems with stability and fuel usage. So they're already a relatively low range ship. They're less than 3,000 miles by design. But due to the stability problems, they also cannot use all of their fuel. So they can have a rough time going long distances, and this is a case of it.
Can you disable the pic?
The picture?
Oh.
Okay. Sorry. Ah,
It's all right.
we're in a gameplay.
We are.
So Z13 is traveling across the North Atlantic during relatively heavy seas, and they see water is coming over the bows. These ships are all very wet ships. Water comes over the bow, the water comes over the deck. It's just a bad, miserable time to be in heavy seas in any of these ships.
Which makes them also horrendous in Arctic situation, or very cold because
Yeah.
ice forms up and so on and so forth. I can
Right.
imagine.
And so the Z35 is not a Moss class. We'll get to that one, because that's a special class. And but the Z13 is going through this. They're seeing water come in, and water is coming over the deck, and is also going into ventilation chutes. Not as badly as with Z5's spill, but it's coming in. It's dousing boilers, and they have to relight them and go on. And one of these things that the ship's crew has to deal with is that they're constantly on edge, especially with the engineering crew, because they don't know when the boiler is going to fail. They can fail at any time and anywhere, and basically bring the whole ship to a stop. And so they're fighting the entire sailing way to Norway to keep the engines running and keeping it going, with water coming in, with other damage problems, and losing men because the ship is moving so much that people are bumping in and running into a wall and breaking collarbones. A couple men go overboard from Z13's crew, and a few others are knocked out for broken bones and other damages. And so they basically had to work round the clock to keep these things running, and with large crews, and also had to do damage control to keep flooding from happening, and other problems. So it was not a good time. Z13 barely makes it to Narvik to refuel. It's basically running on fumes by the time it gets there, but she gets there. She also runs into a rock at some point and gets a gash in her hull, and so she's basically stuck in Narvik from that point on. But when the battles of Narvik is probably the shining, quote unquote, the biggest moment that the German destroyers are involved in. So there are 3 battles of Narvik. First one is against Norway. The German destroyers roll up, and they basically sail right into Norway, and it's heavy fog. Can't see anything. The Norwegians have some ships there, most notably the coastal defense battleships, Eidsvold and Norge. And so these ships are basically ordered: do not engage the British, engage the Germans. And so the 1934 class and some of the 1936 class, which we'll get to, roll up, and they end up sinking Eidsvold and Norge. They come up on Eidsvold, basically send over a boarding party, talk with the Norwegians, basically offer them the chance to surrender. The Norwegians say no, and allow the Germans to go back to their ship. On their way back to the ship, the Germans fire a flare, and destroyers launch a lot of torpedoes into Eidsvold, and it immediately ammo detonates and sinks. And so a lot of questions have been asked about why didn't the Eidsvold fire? We don't know. And Norge is a similar story. Basically, just German destroyers sail up and torpedo it, and it also ammo detonates and sinks. Let's see. And then the Second Battle of Narvik is basically the German destroyers have taken Narvik and are sitting and refueling overnight. They had snuck a oil ship in and as a merchant liner, and basically with the intent of it serving as an oil ship. And they were refueling, but it took a lot of time because they didn't have powerful enough pumps to do it all. And the British Navy sent in a destroyer force at night, and these are the H-class destroyers. So these are not the top-of-the-line Royal Navy destroyers by any stretch of the imagination. They send these destroyers in, and the destroyers launch their torpedoes and engage in gunfights and leave. And they end up sinking several of the German destroyers and damaging them. Some of them have to beach, like Z-13 has to beach as well. And I think Z2 beaches at this time. And the commander, the Führer de Destroyer, or FDZ, Der Destroyer, is in one of these destroyers that gets hit by a torpedo and also dies at this time. So they now have a change of command. And this is the Second Battle of Narvik. Some of the British destroyers are lost in the fight, but it's more fuel that the German destroyers are spending that they don't have. And then the Third Battle of Narvik starts within the next day or two. And basically the Third Battle of Narvik is a bunch of tribal class destroyers like Cossack and Eskimo, being two of the participants, and HMS Warspite come in and clap a lot of destroyers. Basically Warspite sails in with a sword or with its spotter plane spotting ships, and comes in and point blank shoots a lot of destroyers. The tribals come in. Eskimo rams a destroyer. Well, Cossack rams over a destroyer to get to another destroyer. Eskimo loses her bow for the first time out of 2 times. They're sinking these things left and right. The Germans do claim that some war crimes were committed during this battle. That's not something that I am an expert in, but it's not a pretty battle, but it is a knuckle to knuckle, basically brawling battle in the middle of a fjord, so a port like this, basically, with destroyers and Warspite circling around and dropping torpedoes, firing at each other, the whole shebang. And so that's the last battle of Narvik. After these battles of the invasion of Norway, Germany has lost about half of their total destroyer force. It's gone, reduced to atoms. And that's something that they will never really be able to recover from. And that's a large reason why you never see destroyers much in terms of the German Navy after this, except for the Channel Dash. You don't see destroyers really with Bismarck. They go with Bismarck to Norway, but they don't go with her outside. And you don't see them with Scharnhorst and Gneisenau very often, as well as, but you do see them during the Battle of Barents Sea. And a lot of this is they don't have enough range to go with these large ships, and they are just not available. So they're either in maintenance, refit, or just there isn't enough of them.
We are still on the masses, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
let's go for it.
So T-61, I'm going to be very brief on, was a Danish destroyer that was under construction. or torpedo boat even, that was under construction, and Germany basically captured it, and this was the design that they were going to complete it to. I don't think they ever completed it though. But that's the story of T-61. Germany does this with several destroyers, including some French ones, but they complete very few of them. So the main war crime that Germany claims during the Battle of Narvik is that they claim it may have been Dutch instead of Danish. Actually, Dutch sounds right. Sorry. But the main war crime that they claim during the third, or in British terms, second Battle of Narvik is that they claim that the British crews were shooting at sailors in the water. It's not. I did not look into it far enough to figure out whether or not that happened for sure from the British side, but that is the claim that they made. Congratulations to Mini Mickle 674 for winning a T-61. It's a good little ship.
Sent.
I'm gonna hydrate a little bit because it is hot in here because the air conditioning does not work in the streaming room.
Yeah, the aircon is broken. Let me open the door.
Yeah. Let's see. Might actually have to peel a layer. Yeah, I'm gonna do that. So, give me just a minute, guys. Robin's going to give us some gameplay of T-61.
I'll try.
And I'm going to peel a layer real quick. So, give me just a minute.
It's all right. So yeah, so far we had let me. We had the G101 with who again? Crazy little mouse, I think it was. Yeah, crazy little squirrel. Sorry. And then we had Mikkel with the T-61. Congratulations. The T-61 design kind of does, like it is the front, kind of does look like a mouse, except the bow is just completely different. I'll reserve some questions for Blip once he's back, especially regarding why in the game German DDs get sonar.
Okay. I'm back.
He's back.
Wet shirtless.
Is the fact that German destroyers get sonar is a translation of equipment they actually had? Or
So, by this point, in terms of destroyers, almost all destroyers had some form of sonar. In all navies, at least hydroacoustic search. So that's the ability to have passive sonar and hear things. German sonar, especially their passive sonar, was known to be better than average. So that's probably where the idea of giving them all sonar came from. Because quite famously, the Prince Eugen detected Hood's engines from before Bismarck did. Thanks to our sonar. So that's probably where that comes from. And but basically almost all ships during World War II had some form of sonar, but some are better than others and some are better designed for it than others. Because if you put sonar in a ship like Iowa that has humongous engines that are running at very high power, then you're probably not going to be able to hear very much, just because of the engine output. And so that ends the story of the 1934 and 1934A type destroyers. That's Z1 through 17, if I remember right. Yeah, or sorry, Z1 through 16. So they made 16 of them. And a lot of them were lost during the battles of Narvik. But a couple of them survive. One of them ends up serving in the French Navy for a little while. And go through the war. I think even one of them also serves in the Russian Navy for a little while. The follow-on class is the 1936 class destroyer. So we don't have a like a regular 1936 class destroyer in the game. The closest example would be kind of a Z-35-ish, but it would be smaller. The 1936 is the same armament as a 1934. You have 5 128 millimeter guns, 2 forward, 3 aft, with 8 torpedo tubes. You have a better bow. It's very much more of an Atlantic style bow. You have better stability. They're larger. You have a little bit better reliability, but it's the same boilers that are horrendous boilers. And Z-20 through 22, so the last 3 of these ships, they made 6 of them, get the true Atlantic bow, and so they look a little bit different. Let's see if I can get. They're designed for a speed of 36 knots. All of them exceeded their speed during their speed trials, ranging from 39 knots up to 41.5 knots, which is extremely fast for a real ship. And of course, in World of Warships Legends, we can go 50 knots on some ships with some builds, but in real life, going 41 knots is crazy. So let's see if we can pull up some examples. Yeah, this is one of the 1936s. This is another one, if I remember right. Looks right. And this is one of them sinking during the Third Battle of Narvik. If I remember right, that's Z-17. And then this is one of them on fire during the Battle of Narvik. If I remember right, Z2 is still around as a hulk in Narvik. You can actually go see it. There's some videos of it. There's some pictures of it out there. It's rusted, but it's parts of the hull is still there. Let's see. Was there a modification of the 1936 class that gave the secondaries of the planned O-class battlecruisers to the primary armaments of the DDs? So I think you're talking about the 1936A class. So that comes after, or next, basically. And so the basic 1936 class destroyer has the 128 millimeter guns. And these are called the Narvik class in a lot of documentaries and a lot of old Allied texts, because 5 out of 6 of these ships were sunk during the Battle of Narvik. So, you know, the Allies just name it the Narvik class because we sunk them all there, so there's no point in giving them any other name. And but Z-20 makes it out because Z-20 was not there. The following on from this class is the Type 1936A. This is when they introduced the 150 millimeter gun. It starts with Z-23, which we have in game. Let's see if I can get a picture. This is one of the mobs. Yeah, so this is, I think this is Z-23 itself. So when they first build the 1936As, they all have single guns. So they have 4 150 millimeter guns. The original design was that they were going to have a twin 150 millimeter gun turret on the front, because apparently that was lighter than putting 2 150 single mounts. Didn't actually turn out to be worse. And a lot of the German destroyer commanders wished they could have gone back, but that's what they had. And so they end up having this, or no, not that one. They end up going from this to the twin gun mount you can see here.
Oh no, Blip. Damn it.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. It's not your fault.
Robin's just sitting here busy doing 170k damage in T-61. And
That Gneisenau just failed his rush miserably.
oh no.
And I'm gone. Sorry, you can put back on the
No,
picture.
you're
There's
fine.
not gonna be any more gameplay here anyway, so.
The 1936As come in two types. So you have the 1936A, which is Z23 through Z29. And you have the 1936A parenthesis mob parenthesis. So they call them the mobs. And so the mob type are basically slightly larger and a little bit more reliable. They have just a new version of the boilers that make them a little bit better. And all of the mobs except for one of them just start off with a turret. And so interestingly, Z28 is the only one that's built with 4 150mm gun turrets. And it has 2 of them forward and 2 of them aft, instead of the 1 forward and 3 aft that the other ones have. But all of them that survive end up getting the twin turrets later on. And so the mob type is Z31 through Z39. So we're going to have to do that giveaway here soon. Except for Z35 and Z36, because the Germans can't be consistent about anything, in terms of the destroyers at least. And so the mob type is more or less the best of the 150mm gun destroyers that Germany makes. And that's just because they're just a little bit bigger. They kind of deal with the top heaviness a little bit better, and they have more reliable engines. So all of these ships have the Wagner engines, which are unreliable and problematic and high pressure, and basically cause no end of pain to the crews and the engineering crew of these ships. The engineering crews of these ships had to basically be veterans. So a lot of the officers would basically stay with one ship and just learn how that one ship in particular worked. And they would share information from veteran to veteran, and they had to have this expert level skill in order to keep these ships running. Which means that any losses that they have hurt that much more. The 1936A and A mobs end up being the most common seen after the war, especially in foreign service. Z39 is captured or taken into the U.S. Navy for a little while and evaluated heavily, which luckily we have a lot of pictures of. So I'm going to show you a bunch of pictures of Z39.
Oh boy. Incoming.
And let's see if we can. So this is not Z39. This is Z24 under rocket attack. So I have found evidence of a destroyer being sunk by rockets at one point in time. Granted, these are Royal Air Force planes. They're bow fighters and not Royal Navy planes. But this is Z24 and T24 being sunk by rockets. And we'll get to T24 a little bit later. So this is Z39 in U.S. service. And so they're basically running a speed trial here. This is from behind. From the front. An overhead view. And above and to the side. So they had somebody run a plane around and take a bunch of pictures. This is a Z-23 next to what looks to be either a Gearing class destroyer or a Allen M. Sumner's class destroyer. You can see that the German destroyer is larger, and it's taller, it's longer, and it's bigger. That's the very front view of Z-39. Side view. Oh, engage that destroyer.
I'm dead anyway, but it's okay.
Yep. Well,
Yay!
there you go.
Oh, no, I don't think they're gonna hit, unfortunately.
Nope.
It was a good pre-top though. Could have been fun. Anyway, back to the port we go.
So that's the other side. This is the view in dockyard. You can see the stern design very clearly here. It's pretty much unique only to German destroyers to have this like sort of almost a pike nose, like spiked kind of stern. It was not very effective in service. They didn't like it very much. And I'm not even sure what the design idea was behind this kind of stern. So I just don't know.
So we're on to the Z39 at this point, right?
Yeah, this is Z39.
Okay, perfect.
So another high-speed trial in U.S. service. So another U.S. photo. Another one. You can see, and this is again at very high speeds. And this is an interesting photo because we can see that this is at very high speeds, and you can see that the front funnel is not emitting very much smoke, and the rear funnel is emitting a lot of smoke.
Also, the fact that the midship is like the wake at the midship is so low.
Yeah.
Meaning that I guess the ship is just cutting right through that water basically.
Yeah, and so the difference in smoke here in these funnels is notable. This means that so at this time, using a high pressure boiler, when it was well tuned and using proper oil, you're not going to get very much smoke. When it's not well tuned, you're going to get a lot of smoke. So this means that the front boilers in this photograph are running fine, but they're having problems with the rear boilers somehow. And so like this just shows, it's one more demonstration of how like you just needed to be an expert level to run these things in order to keep them running well. Save the last photo for last. And then another one of these ships sees extensive service in the French Navy well into the 50s, and I think even into the 60s. Serves alongside Richelieu. And that is the French destroyer Marceau, which was XZ29, I think, or no, Z31. And you can see here that the guns have been changed out, and there's more anti-aircraft fire, and that's firepower. But these ships see a relatively long service after the war in foreign navies. There is one destroyer design that is done, the 1936, it's Z51, which is basically based on a Type 1936A hull, but they designed it to operate on diesel engines. It's the only known German destroyer to operate with diesel engines, but it was never completed and never finished. And it's basically going to be a Type 1936A in capability, but running off of diesel. The interesting thing is that one of these diesel engines still survives to this day in a museum in Germany. I think there's even videos of it running on YouTube. It's a very large diesel engine, basically. And so and it was preserved in the 80s and it still exists today in a running fashion like they also made a design of ship that is the 1936 Bs, which is what Z35 is. So I guess we can do a back-to-back giveaway after this, or you can do it after a Z35 game.
Sure.
The Type 1936B is what I would argue to be probably the best destroyer, like full-size destroyer design that Germany does during World War II, because it's basically the same hull as the A type destroyers, but it's armed with the 128 millimeter guns, which are not as heavy. and just works a little bit better in terms of seakeeping and just operation. Because loading a 6-inch gun, a 150 millimeter gun, while at sea at high speeds and moving around and all that sort of thing, that's very hard on your crew. And they can only do it for a limited amount of time and not very quickly. RIP engine. And then they did a follow-up design that was the 1936C. These ships, the 1936Cs, none of them were completed. The most famous of them is probably Z-46, which is featured on the PC version of the game, also in Azur Lane. The Z-46 type, the 1936Cs, were going to be 6 guns and 3 triple turrets that you see on the bow of some destroyers. And then, sorry, no, there were going to be 6 128 millimeter guns, not the 150s, and twin turrets. And then, and they were going to have a new engine as well that were going to come from the Scout Cruiser design, which the Scout Cruiser is what is Tier 10 and the alternate German destroyer line on PC, the Elbing, is also known as the Spa-Kreuzer. But so this design of destroyer was finally going to get rid of the high pressure boiler and adopt a different one that was going to run better. And so that's all the German destroyers that, like full-size destroyers that Germany built during the war, according to German standards, and what they called a Zerstörer. And on paper, these ships are supposed to be able to basically go toe-to-toe with a small light cruiser. On paper. Assuming that they were running properly, assuming that they were in good sea conditions and not dealing with poor stability, you probably could take one of these destroyers up against a small light cruiser.
Like a Dallas?
Like a Dallas, or like a Leander, or something like this. But in reality, you don't want to be the unarmored ship fighting a relatively armored ship. And so it was, in my opinion, it was a questionable design theory. They probably should have gone with a smaller, more reasonable, easier to produce ship. Question, am I an engineer? I am not an engineer. I studied history in university at an engineering university. So where Drakenfell is an engineer that does history, I'm a history nerd that likes engineering. So, and so I know a little bit about engineering to get by and understand what things are going on, but I can't do any of the math or tell you a lot of the details about why things are the way they are. But Germany doesn't build only destroyers during World War II because they can't keep things simple. They also build torpedo boats. So they have basically 4 classes of torpedo boats that actually get built. The Type 35s, where they made an attempt to make basically a Type 24, but underneath 600 tons. So they, because with the treaties, anything built under 600 tons was not counted towards their tonnage in the treaties. So they hoped to get around that with this design. They end up making an 830-ton destroyer. So, and failing this. And it has one 105 millimeter gun and 6 torpedoes. These things had horrendous seakeeping abilities and hull strength. They were just very poorly, well, they were too light. And these are were the notable for being some of the only German ships put into reserve during World War II. So they're bad enough to where they're putting the torpedo boat into reserve during the war. And then the Type 37 torpedo boats are the same story. They're basically just a slightly improved version. 1 gun, 6 torpedoes, terrible seakeeping, also put into reserve. They make about 20 of these total. And they're all in the 8 to 900 ton range. Hydrate a little bit. Really speed running this one. We're only an hour and a half in. So they go back to the drawing board when it comes to their torpedo boats, and they'd come up with the Type 1939 class torpedo boat. And this is also known as the T-22 class. So the T-22 in game is a Type 1939 destroyer. And torpedo boat. And they build 14 of these, T-22 through T-36. And these are about 1,300 tons, and they're probably, in my opinion, the best true destroyer design that Germany built, and they call it a torpedo boat. And they have excellent seakeeping characteristics, as described by both the Germans and the Russians. They're very maneuverable by German destroyer standards. Only problem is that they keep the same bothersome high pressure boiler system that just isn't reliable. And they're somewhat slow. In service, they manage to do on average about a max speed of 31 knots. Although they were designed for up to 34 knots, they didn't see that in service. They have 4 105 millimeter guns, 6 torpedo tubes. You're pretty familiar with it from in game. But these are basically, like, in terms of like a medium-sized ship that you could mass produce, these are probably the best ones that Germany made. But they just didn't capitalize on it and preferred to make very large destroyers. Then the follow-on class of that would be the Type 41. None of these were completed, but they were very close to completion. One of them was 96.5% completed by the time that the Americans captured it in port. And they were basically going to be an improved, faster version of the Type 1939s. And I guess the only other really notable design that I can think of is the Spa-Kreuzer, which was going to be 6 150 millimeter guns and twin turrets. And it's also known, it's known on PC as Elbing. To most other people it's known as the Type 1938 Spa-Kreuzer. They laid one or two of them down, but they never completed any of them. The Z-46 was the Type 1936C class. That's what that was, Enrico. And so that's the end of my notes. So if you guys have any questions or anything like that, let me know. I did not study the history of anything that is in the alternate German destroyer branch, so I can't really answer your question there, Mobius, about Z-31. Or, Z-31 is a little bit weird because that one was built to different specs. I can't really say anything about Gustav, Julia, or Felix Schultz or anything like that. I just don't know anything about them. Type 39s could have been the Fletcher of Germany in terms of mass production. Yeah, they're a lot easier to produce. The problem, though, is that they do have somewhat, they have a light gun armament. The 105 millimeter German gun is not a good gun, the destroyer version. That would be the main problem. You would probably see Germany trying to go up to a 128 millimeter gun, which would be good for them. But you'd have to go or fix that. Well, my hair was also cut yesterday, but Robin's hair is the one that has been devastated.
I don't know why you guys keep talking about it. Is it that big of a deal? Seriously?
It's just a shock at this point.
I know, I understand.
I wish I knew why they were all over the place with their designations and numbers, but that just that changes so much and over time, and so I can't really answer it.
That is disgusting.
Let's see. Most successful German destroyer design, in terms of what Germany calls a destroyer, would be the 1936B, which is what Z-35 is. There were 3 of them finished, which was Z-35, Z-36, and Z-43. How would
Good
the
game.
German destroyers fare against the Trival in a mass combined fleet action? The Tribals would win. We already know what happens. Battle of Narvik happens. Granted, the German destroyers were damaged and were not in good state in that, but they were just destroyed by the Tribal class. So let's see.
I got a question. Why was the decision of mounting such high caliber, I mean, above average caliber guns?
Yeah.
Every other nations were using 127s. They were using, 120 or lowers.
Yeah.
What was the decision to put 150 millimeters on destroyers like this in terms of weight? Because a ship like some British before the Tribal class had single guns, but the guy there, even though it didn't exist, was projected to have the same amount of guns, but at a caliber of 150 millimeters.
Yeah.
Why was that?
The hope was that it would be capable. You could basically take 2 of them, because you could probably hopefully produce 2 of them, and then 2 of them should be able to take out a cruiser.
Oh, so you would bring the firepower of a cruiser in 2 cheaper destroyers that can
Yeah.
also. Okay, I understand. All right.
That was the idea. Unfortunately, the German 150 millimeter gun that they use on these ships is actually terrible for fighting anything with armor. Their armor penetration is very poor. They're more specialized for using HE ammunition.
So we have the Z39 and the Z35 that we are going to give away as soon as possible, basically. So let me get another winner really quickly.
So there are some German U-boats kept as museum ships, but I am not aware of any destroyers. Well, there are definitely no destroyers kept as a museum ship. There are a few sailing ships that are kept that were German.
So the lucky winner of the Z39, guys, if you maybe I'm wrong, but if you get a duplicate, if you already have the ship, the compensation will be credits. I saw somebody say it in the chat. So the winner is going to be Z39 is going to be Captain Maximus. Congratulations to you for winning the Z39. All the ships will be invoiced after the stream, guys. So if you don't have it directly in your port, as soon as I announce it, it's normal. And I'm going to announce quickly the winner of the last ship, which is the Z35. Very good German destroyer. Probably one of the best at tier 6, I would say.
Yep.
Let me just take a quick note here. Z35.
Yeah, the German or the Russian destroyer with the 305 millimeter gun, that is a 305 millimeter recoilless rifle. It's not a proper 305 millimeter gun, as we would think of it. But they did test it.
And the winner of the Z35 is going to be Bugsy Skill 2K12. And that's all giveaways done, people. That's all the giveaway done. I mean, I haven't gotten any gameplay on the rest of the ships. You know, we haven't played the T-22. We haven't played a bunch of stuff, but that's about all you had to say about these DTDs as far as I know.
Yeah, I mean, the major part of their service comes at the very beginning of the war, leading up to the Battle of Narvik and the invasion of Poland. They do a lot of actions there. In the later part of the war, they're pretty much just escort ships, and They achieve a few victories here and there, but against like other destroyers and that sort of thing. But their main thing is just bombardment duties in the Baltic and mine laying. They do a lot of mine laying. That's the reason why. That's I guess another interesting feature. The larger destroyers have basically a railroad track that runs down both sides of the destroyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in the overhead view, which is not this one.
Yeah, this
See
one.
these two railroad tracks that allows the German destroyers to do mine laying, but it has a secondary purpose as well. The German destroyers are designed to be able to reload their torpedoes at sea, and they have a special rail cart that is designed to carry its torpedoes. That's why one of the rail tracks is longer than the other, because one of them has to go to the forward torpedo tube, and one of them only has to go as far as the rear torpedo tube. But also they're used for moving mines and that sort of thing around and launching them off the back of the ship. So
The ZF6 we have in game, a question from Ray.
Yep.
Was it an actual project? Just only a project? Like, what is this about regarding
Yeah.
that DD?
So, and during the invasion of France, Germany takes the French destroyer that was under construction, that was named L'Opiniâtre, the Opinionated.
Oh, L'Opiniâtre, okay.
Yeah.
L'Opiniâtre, ouais.
Yeah. I'll allow him to,
Not the Opiniâtre, it's L'Opiniâtre. It's very difficult to pronounce.
Yeah.
Have to.
and audio is bugging with me. Okay, let's see if I can fix things.
Audio is bugging. All right. Maybe the microphone volume is getting a bit low.
I think it moved.
Okay.
Hopefully it should be better now. Sorry about that. But ZF6 Germany captured this destroyer and had a bunch of proposals to complete it. And ZF6 is loosely based on those proposals. I don't think that the guns that we have on ZF6 were part of that design, but were part of another experimentation that they did. But they're an interesting gun, so we put them on. But basically, ZF6 was one of the names that they gave to ZF6, or to L'Opiniâtre, and during that design process. They never completed the ship, though, so. Let's see. There are no plans to add sea mines. So the like sea mines, just, I don't know. It wouldn't be very fun to run into a sea mine. It would do so much damage. It'd be no plans for it. But very low speed torpedoes, or just torpedoes in general. So ZF6 was a campaign ship in World of Warships Legends. It was a campaign last year, so about 5 months ago, I think. Yeah, so, okay. So that's all I have prepared for German destroyers. If anybody has any questions as well.
Yeah, it's question times. I'll just finish this game and we'll wrap up the stream at this point.
Yeah. So the difference between Z35 and Z39 is that they're two different subclasses, and the primary difference is their firepower. Z39 is a Type 1936 A mob destroyer, which was armed with the 150 millimeter guns. Z39 had one of these guns removed and replaced with anti-aircraft firepower later in the war, and that's why she only has 4 total guns. The Z35 is a Type 1936B destroyer, which has the 128 millimeter guns. It's a little bit smaller, and they had a little bit less reliable engines than the MOPS did. But it had better sea keeping. So trade-off. The Z46 was just to be a better, basically just a better version of the Type 9036 destroyers using the twin turrets. So you get more firepower for about the same weight was the idea and the hope. Let's see. When is it the next dev stream? Next dev stream will be after the next update, which comes in 2 weeks. So it'll be in about 2.5 weeks or so will be the next dev stream. It's the best German DD in Legends to hold down the R2 trigger and treat like an SMG. Probably Z35.
Like the German DD.
Yeah.
ZF6 when you use main battery rebuild booster, but it didn't existed. Some of the fastest firing ships, at least efficiently, is gonna be the Mars.
Yeah.
In terms of DPM, because you have these 128s. If you spec for it, they can have a very decent reload.
Yeah, you could run Z23 with them too.
You could, yeah. The Z23 though has the 150mm. Oh, right. No, they do have the 128 as well. Correct.
Yeah, as long as you don't equip the 150 upgrade.
Right, that's correct. So. All right, I'm just gonna rush this Jean-Bart, try to get the kill, and we'll cut down the stream after that because the game is won regardless at this point. So let's see if. Oh, come on. YOLO. I wanna die here, but that's okay. Hello. Oh, you're showing the wrong side, buddy. I'm still alive.
And one of the interesting things with Z23 is that if you equip the 150mm guns before equipping the hull, you actually get less of them. You get 4 of them rather than 5. Because the hull upgrade gives you the twin turret on the front. Fun little fact there. So there's 3 different armament setups you can have for Z23 in that sense.
All right then.
So,
chat, can we get some hearts and thumbs ups or any emoji you want for Blip? And once again, providing us with a lengthy stream.
Yep. So thanks for coming, everybody. German destroyers were very important to the Kriegsmarine, but unfortunately they didn't have very good ones. So they used them heavily when they could, whenever they were running, but they weren't always running, which is the main problem with them. And so they don't get as much attention as other German ships do, but in the future, for some point, we'll probably have some German warships appear. But first, before we all go, we need to vote for the next Ships of the Line stream.
Forgot about that completely.
You should have the message in the link in Discord.
Yeah, I have it. Oh, already.
So before everybody leaves, we need to vote. The options are United States destroyers, Russian and Soviet battleships, Japanese cruisers, or a special topic on battleship armor schemes. So,
okay.
And so this topic will be not about in-game armor, but about historical armor, and, the evolution of how basically they protected battleships over time, and like what's good, what's bad, what design considerations there are. So. And then, of course, Japanese cruisers, that'll be light cruisers and heavy cruisers. U.S. destroyers, there's plenty of them and lots of sources for them. And Russian battleships, probably a lot of you haven't really heard much about them and think that they're all fake. But they're actually, all of the Russian battleships are based on designs, and I can find documents on them and probably bring some pictures to you to show you what they are about. So, there's some pretty interesting designs, especially like Lenin is very interesting. How they get that much power into a ship that size. And so should be an interesting topic.
Black hole generator.
Black hole generator, yes. Put the engines forward of the boilers. Big brain.
All right. Well, I guess you'll know which is going to be the next one when we announce the next stream. But if there's anything else to say, we're going to say goodbye to you, people. I'll say my farewell, and congratulations again for all the winners of today's stream. And I hope that you enjoyed your time with us tonight. I will see you next time and leave the end for Blip.
Thank you for coming again, everyone. So the sources for this video is the major one is going to be Koop and Schmolke. They're German destroyers in World War II book. You can find the versions in German as well as in English. The English one's a little bit harder to find, but you can find them. The other sources are as well some comparative works inside of other books, like in David K. Brown's books. Of course, also Wikipedia, the Dreadnought Project. Huge shout out for them for allowing us to use some of their blueprints of earlier German warships. Also, a little known gold mine is the Russian translation of the Wargaming Wiki. So our historians work more closely with the Russian wiki editors. And so a lot of these ships that you can't find easy sources of, if you go to the Russian version of the Wargaming Wiki, you can find a lot of historical information there. So I do recommend checking that out. If you are ever wondering about a ship and can't find any information about it, you might find information about it there. So I do recommend that. So that's everything I have for tonight. Thank you for coming, and we will see you next time with whatever you voted for.